Hi, it's Carol Salter here, reading chapter 8 today from my novel Witch on the Warpath. Let me think. Last time I read to you, I think some leprechauns had got involved, so we'll see what happens to them today. Chapter 8, Terror from the Sky. "Where are we going now?" asked Miles, fed up with all the troll business. "'Cause I've got a terrible thirst on me, so I have. I thought we'd let him loose around Ham Common. He'll be safe there, lots of greenery and rabbits to eat. It'll take him weeks to wander home, if he's a mind to," replied Seamus the sage. "Aye, and get him back over that old big river'll take him eons. Walk right back to the river's source, I'm guessing," interjected Finley. "Then back down the other side too, if I'm any judge of trolls, and I think I am," responded Miles, trying hard to sound as wise as Seamus. "What a grand idea, Seamus," complimented Finley, ignoring Miles' feeble efforts. "You are so clever, so you are." The compliments began anew as the three tiny leprechauns, in their traditional costumes of green, sat on the edge of Onk's marvellous hat. Next to them on the brim, the small ball of pink light rolled to and fro. After a short break in the conversation, Miles identified a problem he realised none of them had considered till now. "Seamus?" There was a distinct questioning edge to his voice. Replied Seamus, tongue sticking out the right side of his mouth like someone threading a needle. He was concentrating on the job in hand, steering Onk. "Just how are we going to get off this gigantic pongy pile of flesh?" Miles asked, pleased he'd found a loophole in Seamus's brilliant plan. I'm glad you asked me that, Miles, so I am. Thought I'd save that part of the rescue plan as a surprise, so I did," answered Seamus, stalling for time. Seamus didn't have the slightest idea how to get down from a troll. It had seemed such a grand and noble plan when he'd concocted it earlier, as the three of them were gathered in their local public house, the Flask, taking the odd tipple from unsuspecting humans' pints of beer. Fairy folk rarely paid for anything. They obtained their alcohol free of charge from unsuspecting humans. The tiny fairy species were brazen, taking their own silver thimbles along to human drinking places. Once settled at a particular table, they'd lower their personalised thimbles into the people's glasses, absconding home with their illicit gains. There was nothing like a thimble full of beer and a fish flake with a one-chip supper. Sometimes folk lost their thimbles and were forced to improvise with other items. The most common replacement was the silver foil from inside cigarette packets. Clever individuals would craft these into temporary thimbles to carry home the precious nectar. Poor attempts would wind up in pub ashtrays, while mischievous traffic imps would launch their disposable thimbles skyward, sticking them on the ceilings of pub toilets next to lumpy blobs of wet toilet paper. Another hilarious jape. Humans always took the blame for these acts of literal high spirits. The three leprechauns, enjoying their early evening drink, had overheard two hairy grey sewer gnomes discussing the amazing spectacle they'd witnessed down by the supermarket not 30 minutes previous. It had been Onk, arriving for dinner with his hat light show. This piece of gossip would not have ignited the leprechaun's heroicism, except Seamus had witnessed another interesting scenario the night before in the George. It was whilst two watchers were discussing the sad loss of an unborn fairy babe. Seamus noticed Gristle the witch sitting slumped down in a darkened corner of the hostelry behind the watchers. She was trying a little too hard not to pay attention to what was being said. Seamus knew of her dark reputation and the rumours of fairy babes going missing in the area. He recognised she was up to no good, but he felt unable to do anything about it at that point. This, confirmed by the gnome's discussion of the babe's whereabouts, had given Seamus the idea to save the wee tot and present it to the fairy council. The chance of a fat reward was not to be sniffed at either. Fired up on alcohol, it seemed the most natural thing to save the wee babe. Tipsy as they were, or leprechauns would tell you they never got drunk, the three of them tracked Onk down. Trolls were predictable. They found him in the supermarket having a nap. While Onk snored in his chaise longue of cardboard boxes, they climbed aboard his hat, intent on rescuing the tiny babe before the wicked witch arrived to turn her into slime, or worse. The plan had been to remove the infant from the troll's hat before he woke up, thereby saving the precious infant's life without incurring the wrath of an angry troll. Unfortunately, Onk had risen from his dreams while the three leprechauns were arguing about their next move and where to go. Onk had taken their conversation about removing the babe off the hat to be part of his orders, so he'd risen to his feet, leaving them stranded high and dry on the brim of his fetching hat. Onk proved to be even more of an attraction as the evening progressed. Not only did he have a tiny unborn fairy rolling round his hat like a tiny pink roulette wheel, he now had three tiny men perched on the edge like mantelpiece ornaments. It was a bizarre collection. Seamus had been hoping the other two hadn't noticed the slight oversight in his exit strategy. Just miles to pick up on it, Seamus moaned in his head. As move, go and stop had worked well thus far, Seamus decided to continue with the same commands when extracting Onk from the train at Richmond Station. There were a couple of sticky moments trying to negotiate the lift because the leprechauns couldn't locate the stairs, but all in all, they thought they did a grand job, so they did. The lift doors were only buckled in the middle, and the contraption still went up and down most of the way. Admittedly, you had to crawl out the 18-inch gap at the top, with it juddering and groaning like an old woman with arthritis in the morning. But otherwise, it was perfect. The end result saw Onk lumbering west along the towpath, oblivious to the beautiful landscaped ham house built in 1610 for Thomas Varasone, Knight Marshal to King James I. According to its current owners, the National Trust, it was the finest surviving example of a 17th century property in England. That amazing fact meant nothing to a city troll and the three brave, if slightly stupid, leprechauns. The sun, a mere memory on the retinas over Ham House, created a wonderful silhouette in the growing darkness. The pale ghost moon appeared in the deepening blue sky, promising a full and brimming show later that night. Miles had decided it was time to ask Seamus about his supposed surprise and remind him of his terrible thirst, when suddenly, out of the developing night, came a whoosh! A flying banshee. It came screaming like a demented hen who'd spied a fox and flew at the crew, talons stretched wide, reaching for the fattest of the leprechauns. The old tawny owl had begun its evening hunt for food shortly before Onk arrived at Richmond Station. In the owl's opinion, a good deal of its food liked to be eaten, and came willingly within its grasp. As a consequence, his first meal every night consisted of anything he could spy from his roosting place. His roost was situated in the upper branches of one of the few remaining oak trees lining this stretch of the Thames. It saved a lot of energy on an owl's part. He couldn't understand why other owls did all that silent swooping on death-laden wings thing. Took a lot out of an owl, and this particular bird wasn't getting any younger. Thinking it better to take your first course from those offering themselves as voluntary sacrifices. Owl discovered the paradoxical strategy of yelling at his prey as he flew towards them. This bizarre technique, going against owl hunting tradition, ensured his chosen victim stayed rooted to the spot in terror. "Ah!" yelled Seamus, rising into the night sky, snatched up and gripped tightly by the owl's razor-sharp talons. "Try to eat me, would you, you old bag of bones and feathers?" came Seamus's fierce squeal from inside the darkness. Struggling round to face his aggressor, Seamus bashed the hungry old owl hard on the feet with his shillelagh. "I'll teach you! Seamus O'Flaherty the Seventh doesn't take this from anyone, especially not some flea-bitten old owl." Seamus continued his tirade, his tiny angry voice issuing from somewhere high above the water. The owl was surprised. He was used to his prey struggling and squealing a bit, but they didn't retaliate with weapons. They went into a limp, passive state, hanging beneath him with a blank, open stare. They certainly did not keep hitting you on the legs with a short, brown, pointy twig. "I know," thought the owl. "I'll bite its head off. That'll quieten it down." For this attempted action, the owl received a severe poke in his right eye with said stick. With a watering sore eye, ear battering, and feet which were being poked with a pointy stick, the owl decided he'd had enough. He liked food that wanted to be eaten. Deciding he'd go back for another morsel, a bit more receptive to being eaten, he opened his talons and dropped Seamus from high up in the starry night sky into the dark river with a splash. Owl flew back to the remaining food waiting for him on Onk's desirable hat. "Drop me in the water, would you?" shouted Seamus as he plummeted downwards. "Come back here!" he screamed, the cold black water closing over his orange-haired head. Back on the bank, Onk had his own problems. He was engaged trying to swat the swooping, screeching owl. In a moment of madness, Onk had the bright idea of using his hat to scare away the bird. Another troll might have used the hat to capture it and eat the owl, a rare delicacy. Onk did not eat live flesh, so he was content to frighten it away. The two remaining leprechauns clung on for dear life, while the hat undid itself and became a dog blanket as Onk waved it to and fro. In the gloom, the leprechauns and the fairy babe tumbled off the blanket, dropping down into the long dark grass. The owl flew away annoyed, leaving Onk gaping at his unravelled hat. "Gone," he said, staring at his hat that was no more. "Gone," he repeated, looking around the ground for his pretty. His great shoulders rising and falling with heartbroken sobs, Onk lumbered about the path, crying. He'd lost his pretty. It took a lot to get a troll to cry. It wasn't something they did often. Females might cry when they were sending their offspring off from home, but that was because they were headed on their big journey and would be gone for years. In the past, losing something wouldn't have bothered Onk that much. Since finding the babe and securing her to his hat, he felt she belonged to him, like family. Regardless of their brief association, feelings of attachment were beginning to surface. When it began to rain heavy despite his distress, Onk left the riverbank. He hated getting his hair wet, which is why he always wore a hat. His face was wet with tears. He turned on his heel and he headed off in search of cover. Once Onk was out of sight, the two remaining leprechauns rushed over to the water's edge. They looked down from the bank, scanning the inky water for their friend, hoping to find him alive somewhere in the drink. The end of chapter 8. I hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you again soon. For now.